Under the Hoodie is a podcast hosted by Scott Hoyt, where we have candid conversations with the founders and leaders shaping the fantasy sports and gaming industry. We unpack the real stories behind their wins, losses, and turning points along the way. Subscribe so you don't miss an episode.
Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Under the Hoodie. I'm Scott Hoyt, host of Under the Hoodie, founder of Fantasy Sports Strategy, which also produces this show. Very excited about today's show as we have a guest who is creating a lot of buzz lately in the fantasy sports space. He has turned fantasy football into a year-round game. Where were you years ago when I needed that? Anyway, he is the founder of Griddy and the current winner, and we'll talk about this in a second, the current winner of the current FSGA Pitch Competition. Welcome, Brian Birt.
Hey, Scott. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to chat.
Last time I saw you, you were on Cloud 9, and we're going to talk about the FSGA Pitch here in a second, but how are you feeling about that?
I'm feeling great. Still recovering from week-long conference in Vegas, but I had a blast, and obviously the pitch competition went well. So still feeling good, flying high.
Yeah. For the listeners, let me give you a little bit of context behind the elevator pitch. It is probably the most popular, most attended event of the FSGA two-day conference in Las Vegas, and we only do it once a year. And we ask people to volunteer. We typically get between 8 to 10 companies. They have 3 minutes. 3 minutes, and Brian will attest to this, is not a long time to pitch their new product, their new company, whatever they want to talk about in those 3 minutes. And in front of 300-400 people, active audience, who they now have an opportunity to sell what they're selling. It is a high stress, and it is a lot of fun. And if you win this thing, it is, I think, for me, one of the highlights that you'll have at the FSGA, and you'll think about that for a very long time.
Agreed with all of the above. Definitely a big audience, and a lot of people just throughout the industry, across operators, media, really just representatives from so many of the big companies and apps and games that I play every day. So it was definitely an honor to be there, honor to be up on stage. And I was blown away by everyone's pitches. I thought it was a great crop of founders and companies. And, there were some very composed, very compelling pitches up there. So to win it, especially given the context, it meant the world. I'm thrilled.
And I think you said that well, is in all the pitch competitions that I've seen, collectively some of the best. And I can tell you, Brian, you did a great job, and well received and well earned and well deserved. So congratulations again.
Yeah, thank you so much.
So we're going to talk about Griddy here in a second, but before we do that, I always like to take my guests down memory lane a little bit and tell the audience a little bit about your background, and then take us to current day at Griddy. If you don't mind, just taking a couple minutes to talk about your background.
Sure. If we're going all the way back, I started my career as an accountant, CPA over.
I saw that. I think, what is this? An accountant?
Yeah, the classic CPA to fantasy football puzzles pipeline, tale as old as time. No, I did. So I did 2 years as a financial statement auditor. It was some very valuable experience. I'm glad I did it to kind of see what a true corporate environment is like. And, you do gain a lot of skills and experience from being in that very structured, high pressure environment. But I, as I've said many times throughout the journey, I did not grow up dreaming of being an auditor, and, sports and football have always been my true passion. I mean, it's what I love. More than anything, it's kind of family, friends, and then it's football and sports. And those are all really intertwined. So many of the most meaningful relationships that I have, family bonding, friend group chats. And, it's really kind of all on top of an undercurrent of sports. And so to get to combine the professional world with something that I love so much was always just kind of like a pipe dream. I thought like a career in sports sounded fun, but wasn't realistic. But after those 2 years, I figured I got to at least try, see if there's something out there, and was super lucky to land a job over at Sleeper, and that was probably 2021. The company was 20 or 25 people total at that time, and they took a leap of faith, hired an accountant with 2 years of audit experience, no time spent in tech, but a lot of passion and a lot of conviction about ways that I could help their company and help improve the app. And so, they were very gracious to not only bring me in, but put a lot of trust in me early on to help guide a lot of the product development initiatives. And I was doing a little bit of everything there, but really fell into a product manager role pretty quickly. And so I spent 3 years over at Sleeper before making the leap over to Griddy. But, I always talk about just how fondly I look back on that time at Sleeper. I think anybody listening to this podcast is probably very familiar with Sleeper. If you're
I am. I discovered Sleeper's platform about 2.5 years ago, and honestly, I love them. I think they're as good as anybody out there, frankly.
Yeah, I'm biased, but I of course agree. I'm still in my 3 fantasy leagues over there, and in addition to the picks, and now they have predictions, so it's really turning into a sports super app. And just watching kind of the process of how a new game or a new feature gets built from the ground up, it really gave me the confidence that, hey, after enough reps doing this in the team, I think I could do something similar myself. And so, I definitely did not go into that job thinking that it would eventually be kind of a launch pad into building my own app. But, 3 years in, I just kind of pulled the trigger and thought that Griddy was something worth building.
So there had to be a moment, whether it's a aha moment or something that inspired you to start Griddy. What was it that you went, well, I'm doing the Sleeper thing, and that's really cool, a lot of fun, but there's a gap here somewhere in the market that's kind of sparked this idea. Can you walk us through that?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first I'll give a little bit of background on the idea itself for, people that have never played Griddy. It is a daily fantasy football puzzle. So not based on your prior NFL knowledge, not at all based on the results of live games. It's much more of a strategy type of game. So these 2-minute drafts where you build teams of player cards and you try to maximize your score based on our own scoring settings that keep you coming back. It's a nice balance of that luck and skill. And, again, it's just kind of bite-sized entertainment that you can pick up and play anytime. And that was really the driving force in me wanting to build Griddy is, I absolutely love the fall and the winter and those NFL Sundays and all of my fantasy teams and sports bets and, everything in between. But I found that there was a major void in the market just caused by the seasonality of the football season, right? Like most of our favorite products that we love playing, they are tied to live games, and therefore they're only going to be available 4 months a year. And of course, I know there are some best ball and dynasty formats that are year round, but my league mates are tired of getting trade offers from me, and they're not going to accept them anyways. So I needed something that, as a diehard football fan, I could look forward to playing every morning when I woke up. And I think that's the void that Griddy has filled. And so that's the background on it. But Scott, I know your question was about the aha moment.
Yeah, there has to be one. I mean, I've had them, and I've done a couple startups. I know what they are. Yeah. I know there is one in there somewhere.
Yeah, I don't look back on one moment in particular. It was the culmination of kind of a lifetime of playing different sports games, fantasy products, just kind of the full wide range of these different games that I'd always loved growing up. And, I always think back to a lot of the sports video games, kind of the NBA 2Ks, the FIFAs, the Maddens, where, they've got these franchise modes, these ultimate teams. And, what I was seeing is, hey, my friends and I, what we love more than anything is just building the teams themselves. And I looked across, the landscape as a whole, the media that people were consuming, the YouTube videos that people were watching. And it seemed like that was not an isolated experience. People like the process of building teams as much or more than playing the games themselves. And so I was watching these YouTube videos get tens of millions of views of just people dragging around cards on a screen. And I thought, man, I think we can strip out the actual gameplay portion of this and build a really fun and intriguing app just around the concept of team building itself. And so that was, I would say, the seed that was planted, and it had always been in the back of my mind. And it's been sitting there for a long time, as I said. And I think that's really what inspired me to eventually make the leap was, if you're the entrepreneurial type, you get new ideas, every other
all
week.
the time, right? Your head's spinning all the time.
Exactly. And I've always been that type, back to a very young age. And most of those ideas, you're really excited about them for a day or a week or a month. But, this concept for kind of a daily drafting puzzle style game was one that I could not shake for months and for years. And I think that's the sign that, you really got to go see what that idea can transform into. And I basically just reached the point where I was like, hey, I'm working this wonderful job at Sleeper. It really was a dream job. I loved my coworkers. I still love the team there. But I had the realization, hey, as fun and rewarding and comfortable as this is, I'm just not going to be able to live with myself if I don't take that leap and at least give it my best, give it a real attempt to turn this concept of Griddy into a tangible game that people can play.
So, I think you know a little bit about me as well. I'm a big brand and marketing guy, and I always like to ask this question of new companies. How did you get the name Griddy?
Yes. I cannot take any credit for it. The Griddy origin, in terms of name and branding, that goes to my fiance and her sister.
Really?
Oh yeah.
I have not heard this part of it.
Oh yeah. Well, they had heard me talking about this idea for a game for a month or two. And it was just unnamed project for weeks on end. And so they just sat me down and were like, hey, enough of this. We are just going to sit on this couch until we decide on a name for your game and for your company. Put together a list of, probably 100 different terms that were all either related to football or somewhat adjacent. And of course, one of those words, as you may have guessed, was Griddy, popularized as Justin Jefferson's touchdown celebration. So
he hasn't come back for any royalties, has he?
Not yet, but what if we keep growing? Maybe. But it was the dance was at the time taking over the NFL. All these top tier wide receivers were hitting the Griddy in the end zone. So there was the obvious football connection, and then beyond that, you are putting player cards onto a grid, and so it works in that way. And then of course the football field is fondly called the gridiron. And so it works on, not one, not two, but three different levels. And, it checked a lot of the boxes that I was looking for in a company name, kind of short, catchy. It's a word or a phrase that most people have already heard of, but isn't necessarily, already flooded with a bunch of different keywords and different companies and brands that have already gravitated towards it. And so I felt like it was kind of the perfect mix of everything I was looking for. And it, again, no credit to me. It's all the fiance and her sister.
Well, you didn't have to spend millions of dollars to go hire a big time brand and design firm to do that. He did it on the couch, there's some great stories that I can tell many, how brands get developed, and that's how they get developed. It's really cool. I love the name. And as a branding guy, I was really attracted to that name as well. So I always ask this question of startups and early stage companies. What does your typical day look like?
Oh, Scott, I wish I could tell you. I don't know if I have a typical day. It feels like I'm doing a little bit of everything, and just constantly rotating what I'm focusing on. For context, Griddy right now, it's still a super lean team. I'm a solo founder. I have a dev team overseas, a couple of guys full time who are a lot smarter than me and can do all of the coding and dev work. I've got a social media manager, some customer support, but for the most part, I really am involved in every single function of the company. So the favorite parts of my day are, it's naturally going to be the product work, right? Specking out new features, reviewing updates, helping the designers kind of put the pixels together for whatever we're working on next. And a lot of times that just means sitting down for long stretches of time playing Griddy, which it doesn't feel like work, but it's an important part of the job. When you're constantly making changes to the app, you got to make sure that it's all coming together as you want it to. And I think one of my strengths, certainly as kind of a product leader, is just like all of the details and all of the ways that the various parts of the user experience come together in a seamless way. And anybody that knows me, anybody that knows Griddy will tell you how close I am to the product and the user base. I am a power user on a nearly 300-day streak myself. This is a product that I built because I personally wanted to use it. And so I think that really helps. That really helps keep me on the right path, prioritizing that user experience, prioritizing the game itself and the product above all else. And so that's always the favorite part of my day. It's just anything that's as close to the app and the game and the community. And of course, if you are a part of the Griddy community and you're in the Reddit or the Discord or see us on Twitter or Instagram, you will see that we spend a lot of time just chatting directly with our users and kind of getting their input, their feedback. And, I kind of always say it's a small team, but it's a big community, and it's a very active and passionate community. And we make sure that that's a key input into everything that we're doing.
Yeah, it's funny because I think you're reading my notes here, because I recently went on to a podcast that you did last October with, trying to remember, Betting Startups podcast.
Yes.
And I pulled the transcript from it. And there was a highlight in there that I said, I need to ask Brian about this quote, because it really is very telling. Because in our industry, it's all about community, building community. You heard me say that in my brand panel. Building community, a lot of times equates to trust and credibility and all that stuff. And you said Reddit has been a huge outlet for us. And I'm quoting you on this one. For me, I'm positioning the business as a founder first and really telling my story and putting a face to the brand. The real story is about retention. I was, as a former startup guy as well and a founder of a small company, I really, really loved hearing that. And tell me a little bit about kind of that, building that community and that, what strategies were key to kind of growing that user base. And frankly, and I know you know this, I'm going to tell everybody this, with minimal marketing spend, by the way.
Yeah, I was very intentional in the way that I presented myself in the company, and doing so in a very authentic and frankly a vulnerable way. Just telling my story and making people realize that this is not a game being built by a massive corporation. This isn't another EA franchise. This is a game built by an average guy who loves football as much as you do. And I think that really resonates with people. As human beings, we want to connect with other humans, and we want to root for each other and each other's stories. And so I think, again, really putting myself out there, not as Griddy the business, but as Brian the individual who did have this vision and did have this dream. Not only kind of approaching the community like that, but also just being involved in the community like that. went a really long way, right? And so a lot of, as you mentioned, like a lot of our early growth spikes that got so many of our first waves of users were from, just me posting in football communities and talking about my background and really like why, here's why I quit my job to build a fantasy football drafting game. And, some of those catch the Reddit algorithm, they go viral and, get hundreds of comments. But, I made sure to invest a lot of time and effort and energy into connecting with and responding to every single person possible. Like anybody that has ever left a comment about Griddy, positive or negative, like I will go out of my way to try and respond to that. And, I think it's not going to be scalable in millions of people, but we're not going to stop trying and just connecting with people on a one by one basis. It creates a foundation of trust. It creates, communication channel with transparency that people aren't used to seeing from big corporations. And what it really does is it creates evangelists for your brand, like people that will support you through the good and the bad, people that will go to bat for you, people that will text their friends or spread the app on your behalf. And I think that's what really was kind of the motor, the engine for Griddy getting up to, 50,000 users without spending on marketing.
Yeah, and I assume that the role of that feedback that you get from your players and your users, it really shaped your roadmap. I'm assuming that when you got feedback, you iterated quickly based on that input.
Absolutely. Not every piece of feedback. I'll
I
tell
know,
you
but
that much.
I'm generalizing it to some degree here.
No, you are absolutely right. I think that, just having that level of close touch with users, it does give you such an important perspective on your app and on your product. Anybody who has ever worked on, really anything in their life knows that there is a certain perspective that you lose when you are the one that is so close to whatever it is you're building. You're intimately familiar with every flow, every pixel, the rationale behind all of the decisions that shaped the product that the end users are experiencing. But they are coming in with a completely different perspective, none of the context, none of that personal attachment. And so I think it is just so important to balance your own internal perspective as a professional with, hey, here is what somebody's saying who has never met me. They've never heard of Griddy. They could care less whether I succeed or not because they just, they had a friend text them about the app or they stumbled upon a post and, let's see what they really think about it when you strip away everything else that we already know about the product.
Yeah, and I think people sometimes, I don't think in our industry, but I think people in general really underestimate the power of social media and how well it can be used and how it really is valuable for that user input and ultimately that user experience. I'm going to kind of move forward here a little bit, talk about trends. You are very well spoken, very well articulated, kind of future, and you've got a very unique differentiator here. But how do you see kind of fantasy sports landscape evolving over the next few years? I certainly have got my share of opinions, but I'd love to hear yours as well.
Yeah, from the broader perspective, I think the season-long fantasy, it's always going to be our rock and our anchor. It's not the sexiest trend or topic of conversation, but I do think it's always important to just kind of ground everything back to those season-long leagues. I think for a lot of us, they have a lot of deeper attachment and sentimental meaning because it's not about the games themselves, but it's about the people we play in leagues with and chat with and, talk smack with. So I will always kind of ground any conversation about the industry back to season-long fantasy. Of course, real money gaming has been the hot topic the last couple of years, and that's taken a couple of different forms from, DFS products, kind of sweeps, and now, of course, prediction markets.
I knew that was coming up.
Yeah, I kind of look at it somewhat as a game of regulatory whack-a-mole.
Well, there's a new article that came out today. I was going to bring it with me, but I forgot to bring it. But who is at the commodity trading piece of it, they're saying that they don't believe that it has made all the regulatory hurdles yet as a game of skill as opposed to a betting app. So stay tuned. I think it's still, I've been saying this for a long time. I still believe that there's a lot to unfold before we're going to hear the end of it.
I don't think there's a chance you're wrong about that. We are still in the very early stages of legalized sports betting or sports betting adjacent products.
Yeah.
And there is a lot of evolution to come, both from the operator and regulatory perspective, but also just consumer sentiment. And if you look at a market like Europe or England that, is a couple decades ahead of us in terms of legalized sports betting, they have swung the pendulum back a little bit, in terms of tighter restrictions around how and when you can advertise sports betting or, different ways to access these products. And, I'm a little bit biased as the founder of a completely free to play game, but I do think as the market gets increasingly saturated with the nonstop sports betting content and advertising, there is going to be a little bit of an increased appetite for other types of experiences, free to play games, social games, just products that are, I would say, more entertainment based in nature rather than a zero sum entry where either you win or the house wins. And, those misaligned incentives, of course, are always going to create some tension between companies and users. And that was a lot of the motivation for me building the free to play game.
Yeah. And I think at the end of the day, I'm most interested in how these new trends accentuate the growth of the industry, not cannibalize it.
Yep.
And I think one of the things that you're doing is helping grow the industry, and which is always a unique side story as well, because you could throw a bunch of stuff out there that's just going to cannibalize the industry, and that's not really where growth is going to come from. I think growth is going to come from companies like yourself. And speaking of which, so I know we both know, you and I both know that fantasy football in the NFL takes a lion's share of our mindset and certainly priorities of players in the fantasy world. But do you think that there's a similar puzzle style experience outside of football?
Absolutely, is kind of the one word answer. First, I will say, just in terms of spreading the game and continuing to spread football and sports to different demographics, like I just have to pause there and just agree with you. And I think that's a lot of the beauty of Griddy, is because it is not based on your NFL knowledge. It really is open and accessible to anyone, as long as you can read the info on the cards and match people up. You can be somebody that's never watched a down of NFL football in your life, and you can still excel at Griddy. You can still play every day. You can do great in the game. And so I do think that's a very important call out. And it's something that I'm really proud of. And, it's not just a theoretical thing. I hear stories all the time of, kind of the partner starts picking up the phone because, they see their boyfriend or their girlfriend playing all the time, or it's, the friend in the friend group who hates sitting on the couch on NFL Sundays, but now plays Griddy every day because they love the mechanics. And so, I obviously see like a huge amount of beauty and, positive things in sports for individuals and for society. And so like just being able to kind of grow that game and kind of grow that feeling and sense of community through, I would say, a little bit more of a beginner friendly style of game is a great thing. As I was rambling about that, I forgot the real question. I did not answer your question.
No, you did. You answered in the very beginning. You said yes. I said, are there other puzzle style, other sports that could do puzzle style experiences? And I think your answer was, yeah, but football is a focus, and that's okay. So that I'm not going to let you get away without retelling the story at the pitch competition. Probably the most memorable, one sentence that was conveyed in the pitch competition also got the biggest laugh. I'm sure that you can probably and have that memorized in your head. Tell the listeners about what you said. I love
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. Well, I was, of course, telling the story about, the rise of Griddy after we had finally gotten the game released and started seeing the early community form. And, really the most special part of that was just getting all these really nice messages from users that were telling us how much they were enjoying the game. But there was one piece of feedback in particular that really stood out as the highest compliment that a mobile game could ever receive. And that was a Reddit post that I stumbled on from a user that told me that Griddy was the best at work pooping game on the App Store.
I still remember that so well, and it really, for a conference, it was out loud laughing kind of response, which is kind of cool. Hey, I kind of want to start to wind down here a little bit, but one of the purposes of Under the Hoodie is to hear the journey of people like yourself who are making things happen, and to be able to tell our listeners who might have similar challenges of their own as they're going through a startup phase or early stage, company. As a founder, and everyone's a founder, I mean, these people, most of them are founders. What is maybe the one business lesson that you've learned that you could share, whether it's good or bad?
I've got a couple, certainly. I would say, the first thing is that nobody is going to know your business or your idea better than yourself. A lot of us, we want to go out seeking advice or, read the startup books, listen to experts in the space. And there's some value in that. But again, every individual is going to have their own unique journey, and what may be the best advice in the world for one person might be completely irrelevant or guide you in the wrong direction, based on you and your own experience. And so, if you are going down that journey, I think it's just incredibly important to just trust yourself and trust your instincts above all else. And that's really the conviction that you need to move with speed and kind of build something that's worth using. And, I would say the second part of that is just find a way, if you are in that early stage, more of the conceptual, I've got this idea that I really love, kind of phase of the journey, which, Scott, you and me have both been there. It sounds like a million times. I think a lot of people listening to this are going to sympathize with that feeling. It's really about just finding the quickest, lowest friction way to turn that idea into something tangible that other people can use. And, we're talking right now in the context of Griddy as an app with, 100,000 users and, millions of drafts played and, a kind of full product with five different tabs and all these different flows. But, before that, and before the first version ever of the app, we built the core draft experience as a web app with, no back end, with all of the game logic on a Google sheet that I put together manually, with data that I scraped off the internet. And it was so ugly, but it worked. And that was kind of the first step towards turning Griddy into, a real product, a real company. It was just like, hey, what is kind of the quickest way to bring this idea to life? And so, oftentimes I'll meet a lot of other founders who they have similar ideas and, they're just pushing so hard to realize that full vision in its entirety. And I always tell them, like, what is everything that you can strip out and still make this a usable product? Everyone always talks about MVP, minimum viable product. And there's a reason for that. You've got to just figure out exactly what that is for you and just try to get there with the understanding that it's always something that you can build on over time, and taking a brick by brick approach to building whatever it is you're working on is the best way to do it, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's great advice. And there's there are so many common denominators that I've heard on startups and journeys and some things that they would do differently. And we all have that theory that you go back and a year later, I wish I would have done that, or I wish I'd have done that. But there's no looking back. I think there's you only look forward. Speaking of which, anybody, people or mentors that kind of helped you, influence you in your entrepreneurial journey?
Oh, of course. I'll give a shout out, first and foremost to my family.
Yeah.
Mom, older sisters, incredibly supportive dad, who is the reason I'm a diehard Buffalo Bills fan and, love the NFL so much.
You're welcome for DJ Moore, by the way.
We'll revisit this in maybe 9 months, 10
Yeah,
months.
exactly.
But he's better than what we had now. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, family first and foremost. So many friends who have just been so supportive, and probably played 10,000 Griddy drafts each, helping me test and improve the game. A lot of mentors, Chris Sawyer, who was at the conference with me, has just been, so helpful in so many ways. Joel Simpkins at Ext Capital has been wonderful. There's a million, I could go on for a long time, but I think the takeaway is that, even for a solo founder, it takes a village. It takes so much support. And it's never going to be a linear journey. As good as things seem from the outside, no matter who or what you're looking at, there's always going to be ups and downs. And, it's important to remember, like, people, especially on social media, are always going to share their wins, or they're going to show off at the highest points. But, I think anybody who's been on any entrepreneurial journey will tell you that, there are going to be a lot of ups and downs. And that's why that conviction in what you're doing is so important. That's why it's important to be, building something that really gives you like internal fulfillment and happiness, because that's going to be your spark that keeps you going day after day for, hopefully years on end. And so I'm lucky to have found that with Griddy. I'm lucky to have that great support system, and, just blessed to be working on something that I care so much about.
Yeah, it's a great story, Brian. It really is. And, I've kind of watched it from an arm's length, but I really got to know you a little bit when we were in Vegas, and hear your pitch and hear you now. You're a very humble guy, but you have done a remarkable job with what you have advanced in this industry, and I applaud you for that. I always like to end up on a kind of a fun note, kind of a random question. I always ask everybody. Everybody comes on my show always gets this question, and because I know you're all sports enthusiasts, so I'm sure that there's an answer somewhere in here. What is your favorite sports movie?
Oh, that's an easy one. It's
Really? Okay.
It's Miracle, of course. 1980 hockey team, and so it was pretty cool, growing up watching that movie probably a dozen times, seeing it come full circle, and watching both the men's and women's team take home gold medals was pretty cool. I could have done without the 5 a.m. start time on the West Coast, but I was up and watching. So
it was the highlight of the Olympics. There's no doubt about it.
You know what? And that is the beauty of sports. It's these real life moments that seem Hollywood scripted, like they could never be real. But it's, sports creates those magic moments that bring together, hundreds of thousands, millions of strangers that would have nothing else in common. It's really the great unifier in our world. And that's why I love them.
Yeah. So Brian, tell everybody how they can get a hold of you, how they can sign up, and give your best, not 3-minute pitch, but give me your best 30-second pitch.
Oh, well, everyone's already gotten the pitch. At this point, there's nothing else I can say. I did end the FSGA pitch by saying that the best way to learn any new type of game is to play it yourself. That is certainly true here, especially for a game like Griddy that really is a one-of-one in the space right now. And so you got to go check it out. You can search Griddy Football Puzzles in the App Store or the Google Play Store. If people want to get in touch with me, it's Brian from Griddy on X, or, you can just search down the website, search me on LinkedIn. I'm not a hard guy to find. You can always just pop in the Reddit or the Discord too and tag me, because I spend a lot of my day talking to Griddy users, people in the industry. Anybody who loves sports can get my attention pretty quickly. So
Will I see you at the Fantasy Football Expo? Are you coming?
so I unfortunately have a conflict. That is my own wedding. And
Well, for Pete's sakes, where are your priorities, my friend?
I know. And the fiance who was the one that came up with the name Griddy did not love the idea of me skipping our wedding to go to a fantasy football.
That's congratulations. That's great. Congrats.
Yeah, is it worth it to miss the expo? Time will tell.
I'm not sure you want to repeat that to your soon-to-be wife. I don't think she'd like that answer.
Yeah, she's used to it. She's accepted a life of marrying a football obsessed guy, and she's been incredibly supportive. But yes, gonna have to miss it this time around. But I'll be back. I'll be back next summer, and certainly at all the FSGA conferences to come.
Yeah. Well, see you in Philly for sure. I want to go back to that story about your wife and her commitment. I have a similar story I got to share. My wife and I, she has been her mother passed away from cancer. She's big cancer survivor supporter. She does a lot of charity work for them. And she has known me for a lot of years. I've been doing fantasy football and fantasy sports for 30 some odd years. We wrote it in our vows that we would support each other's causes. So I have witnesses to say that I'm allowed to spend as much time as I need on fantasy sports. And now that I'm doing this own thing on a full-time basis, she loves it. So put it in your vows.
Yeah, no, I gotta see if I can get that in right and get a signature under that, because it's certainly not stopping anytime soon. That's wonderful.
Hey, Brian, it was a pleasure to have you on. Thank you for coming on and talking about your journey. It's a great story. I think I'm going to hear some wonderful things about Griddy. I already have. Again, you are one of the most articulate, very confident, what I call new founders in the fantasy sports arena that I am very impressed with. So thank you for coming on and sharing your story and sharing your journey and your recommendations and your advice.
Yeah, well, it was a blast. Thanks so much for having me, Scott. It was great chatting.
We'll do it again, Brian, and we'll certainly see you in Philly, and good luck with your wedding.
All right. Thanks so much. See ya.
Thank you, everybody. This is Brian Birt with Griddy. Get on and play the game.